Good day! In this lesson, we will deal with issues and challenges in contemporary, popular, and emergent literature. For our objectives, we have two: to determine new emerging genres of literature and to discuss the elements and characteristics of these genres. To begin with, let us define emergent literature. In defining emergent literature, we are always asking what is new every day. We tend to search for information and trends using various ways. It is also the way modern teachers build popularity in the literary world. According to post-colonial studies, the term emerging literature refers to a contemporary body of text that is gaining momentum in the global literary landscape. And having said that, what we are going to focus on is one of the genres under emerging literature, and that is creative nonfiction, which is a popular genre as it is a fastly growing genre in the publishing house and is also known by many other names that include literary nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, nonfiction novel, documentary novel, and new journalism. And most of us might have had an encounter with this kind of literature mentioned, simply through the illustration, the scenario on the bookstore where the different genres of creative nonfiction could be found and read and be able to reach people. The creative nonfiction genre can be difficult to pin down because it's a broad one that includes a wide range of works. It is a narrative plot with an inciting event, writing composed of the real or facts, employs the same literary devices as fiction. To further discuss what creative nonfiction is, let us look at various descriptions of it. According to Encyclopedias Britannica, defines a nonfiction novel is a story of actual people and actual events, told with the dramatic techniques of a novel. It highlights creative nonfiction, the same as utilizing dramatic techniques the way we know, but adhering to real-life events. Also, the new journalism combines journalistic research with the techniques of fiction writing and the reporting of stories about real-life events. Next is the author and founder of Creative Nonfiction magazine, Lee Gutkind or Lee Gutkin, who defines the genre simply as true stories well told. He says that the goal is to make nonfiction stories read like fiction so that the readers are as enthralled by facts as they are by fantasy. Chip Scanlan, award-winning journalist and affiliate of the Poynter Institute, describes creative nonfiction as the union of storytelling and journalism. Here, having these definitions presented proves that there are various and numerous descriptions of what creative nonfiction is, but there are two things about the genre that identifies it as true, that is nonfiction, and it is written like a work of fiction using literary techniques. Creative nonfiction merges the boundaries between literary art and research nonfiction. In literary art, these are fiction, poetry, novel, and many more, while research nonfiction involves statistical, fact-filled, and run-of-the-mill journalism. As being mentioned before, creative nonfiction is writing composed of the real or of facts that employs the same literary devices as fiction, such as setting, voice or tone, character development, and etc. This make it different, more creative than standard nonfiction writing. Moving on, in creative nonfiction, we should first include accurate and well-researched information, second, hold the interest of the reader, and third, potentially blur the realms of fact and fiction in a pleasing literary style, which is while remaining grounded in fact. In the end, creative nonfiction can be as experimental as fiction. It just needs to be based on real-life occurrences or reality. And when we talk about the content of creative nonfiction, it's important to clarify that the content of creative nonfiction does not necessarily have to come from the life or the experiences of the writer. Say for instance, the writer is using techniques from literary journalism to create a portrait of a person interviewed. The writer may choose to write a portrait of the interviewee through an omniscient perspective, meaning the writer wouldn't be in the piece at all. On the other hand, nonfiction writers often choose to write about topics or people close to them, including themselves. As long as the piece deals with something real or something based on the real, the writer is allowed to take the piece in any direction he or she wishes. In here, the writers attempt to observe, record, and thus shape a moment or moments from real life. Writers thus extract meaning through factual details. They combine the fact of detail with the literary extrapolation necessary in rendering meaning from an observed scene. At the same time, successful creative nonfiction attempts to overlay fact with traditional conceptions of dramatic structure. While rendering meaning from an observed scene, a piece should suggest a beginning, middle, and end that clearly conveys the conflict and the character pushes the action towards some sort of closure. In effect, creative nonfiction attempts to project a dramatic literary framework upon everyday existence, rendering it enjoyable, enlightening, and potentially meaningful. While writing creative nonfiction, the writer should dwell on sensory details because a piece should never just tell the reader something or summarize. This is what research nonfiction does. And the story must show or present all the details. Creative nonfiction also has subgenres, and it spans many diverse subgenres. And we will discuss some of it in this lesson, or in this part of our discussion. The first subgenre of creative nonfiction to be discussed was the memoir, which I know all of us are already familiar with. A memoir is a longer piece of creative nonfiction that delves deep into a writer's personal experience. It typically uses multiple scenes or stories as a way of examining a writer's life or an important moment in a writer's life. And it is usually, but not necessarily, in a narrative form. Like the life of Rizal or Jose Rizal, which shows in the books he wrote. Memoirs have the capacity to be funny, profound, moving, cynical, etc. And it may even have resemblances to fiction creativity. A memoir is sometimes confused with an autobiography because they are almost like each other. It both tells stories about the writer's life and recount the writer's life events in chronological order. But we must remember that a memoir is just a slice of life of the writer, whereas the autobiography is the entire life of the writer from birth to the last moment of their lives. Now, here are some tips for writing about your life or a memoir. In a memoir, we can write about nearly anything in our personal experience or life that is significant enough for us to want to retell it. Or it can simply be a snapshot of a moment or a description of a place, person, or thing. We need to make sure that what we are writing about is something that is interesting and relevant, which made such a huge impact in our lives. Choose a topic that you care about, for this will make your piece more descriptive, emotional, and creative. Like the previous statement, the topic should be significant for us because the more significant the topic is, the more things we can write about it. Like a topic that is very close to our hearts can let us convey and write more genuine stories that can move a lot of people. We must seek a deeper or underlying theme within the simple description of an event, and etc., that the reader can connect to. It is important to the story that we are going to tell is where the readers could relate, connect, or resonate, because it will prove that they are interested in our memoir and will keep on reading more. In short, in writing, we can use a lot of description and imagery, if you can, to make the reader feel like they know the topic intimately. There is no specific form or style that it is necessary for a memoir to have, so we must use our own unique voice. Note in mind that writing a memoir must be written in our own way, in which we have to use our own voice that may look or appear as unique. Do it in our own creative style to pique the reader's interest. Do not confuse memoirs with autobiography. They are not the same thing. You may want to find some memoirs in the library or online in order to get a feel for the variety out there and some of the ways you might want to go about writing yours. The next subgenre is the biography. A biography, also called a bio, is a nonfiction piece of work giving an objective account of a person's life. The main difference between biographies and an autobiography is that the author of a biography is not the subject. A biography is a nonfiction book that tells the story of a person's life from someone else's perspective. It contains information about the person's birthplace, education, employment, and interpersonal relationships, as well as significant life events. A variety of documented reference, materials, and a musical composition or even a film can incorporate a biography. And in the perspective of the biographers, they tend to use several research sources, including interviews, letters, diaries, photographs, essays, reference books, and newspapers. If in biography, the author is not the subject, in the autobiography, the author is the subject. An autobiography is an account of one's life written by the author. We tend to ask who we are when we are writing an autobiography, writing about our family backgrounds, talking about our dreams, hobbies, our education, and even retelling the childhood memories we had as we grow up. All of this could be written in an autobiography because we are the writer of our own life stories. Next is the literary journalism, or also known as narrative. Literary journalistic essays are a popular form of creative nonfiction, and their main purpose is to inform and enlighten. Literary journalism is the closest creative nonfiction form to newspaper and magazine writing or reporting. Immersion or narrative journalism is used to describe, for it requires a closer, more dynamic relationship with the subject and the people the journalist is investigating. By having a person who is on the scene or in the right moment to share factual events, the better. It is why narrating and literary journalism is connected. Objective facts are often stretched better to reflect the reality of everyday life and people. On the other hand, literary journalism asserts that people can't be objective because they already have subjective views of the world, contrary to journalism. Therefore, by taking the objectiveness out of the journalistic process, the writer is being more truthful. Travel writing. Travel writing is a form of writing about places, persons, and things in other places. Also writing about how to travel, when to travel, and advice on traveling, all with the reader in mind. It's about relaying your travel experiences to others so that they may emulate them or at the very least not make the same mistakes you did. And it's writing about things in your own backyard that are exotic to everyone else, a local farmer's market, historic site, restaurant, and museum. Travel writing could be written anywhere, and most of us share the same things using a diary. Some are on the back of the portraits being taken at the scene. We all have different ways of expressing and remembering the places we visit, and the significance of travel writing is not only to share but to make something for us to remember. Indeed, travel writing is about places, people, and things on other sites. It was a way where we gained knowledge of other people's lives and cultures. Another option is writing about travel tips and tricks and where and when to go. Again, it's all about sharing your travel stories so that others can learn from the stories we tell or to avoid making the same mistakes that we did. Next, the subgenre to be discussed is the personal essay. Personal essay is a piece of writing, usually in the first person, that focuses on a topic through the lens of the personal experience of the narrator. It is simply a piece of writing in which the author shares a valuable life lessons that he has learned through their struggles and triumphs. The paper can be written in various styles, such as formal essay or creative nonfiction, to describe a significant event. Ultimately, it should be focused on one's first-hand knowledge. In writing a personal essay, here are a few pointers. First is focused. In some ways, the personal essay is similar to memoir, and many of the same techniques can be used effectively. It differs in that an essay is focused on one specific topic, whereas the memoir has the capability to trace or eliminate several themes, topics, and ideas via the author's life that he or she describes and on how it is being described. Second is organization. Not to be confused with form, which will be discussed also, Your essay, like other essays, should have some kind of coherent organization to it. This is not to say that you must use this style, because no matter how you choose to organize your essay, be sure that your paragraphs and ideas flow from one to the next, connected by a common theme. It can be scattered or fragmented, but the entire paper should have a relationship, even if it only becomes clear at the end. This allows the reader to follow your experience. Third is the form. One of the best parts of this kind of writing is the power given to you as the writer. There is no form, no formula, no tried and true method that you must use to be effective. In fact, to copy something that somebody else has done is not only rather boring, but also defeats the purpose of this being a personal essay. You have to choose a form and style that suits you and is fitting for the experience that you are describing. Try to think of the form as a part of the writing itself, not just a framework for it. The form should actually enhance and make more poignant what it is you are talking about. Push the boundaries, but don't go too far. You are still writing an essay or sharing a part of your life personally. Lastly, the diction or language. Like form, in the personal essay, the way in which you say something can mean just as much as the form into which you place what is you are saying. Use language to enhance what you are writing about and not just as a means to say it. And talking about the diction or language, here is where you can get really creative and appropriately use linguistic play to explore your topic and your own relation to it in new and complex ways. The inspirational or the motivational, and poetry. Inspirational or motivational. Books in the inspirational genre contain stories of people who overcome adversity or reach new levels of understanding that inspire and encourage others or the reader to do the same. Poetry. It can be divided into further genres: epic, lyric, narrative, satirical, or prose poetry. Poetry has been around for almost 4,000 years. Like other forms of literature, poetry is written to share ideas, express emotions, and create imagery. Poets choose words for their meaning and acoustic arranging them to create a tempo known as the meter. Some poems incorporate rhyme schemes with two or more lines that end in the likes sounding words. Now, we are down to the elements. Creative nonfiction is a diverse genre, but the successful works in this genre share some common elements. Here are the key elements of creative nonfiction. Scenes. Use scenes to build your story. Scenes allow you to show your readers the story instead of just telling them what happened. Dialogue. Strong dialogue is key to any work of creative nonfiction. It is okay to use quotes even though you may not know what was really said. Character development. Just like in fiction, you need a well-developed central character to carry a story. Story arc. A good story has a calculated beginning, middle, and end. Even though it's nonfiction, think about where the story should start and where to stop for a satisfying ending. Point of view. Often in creative nonfiction, the author's presence is felt in the story. While you may not actually be in the narrative, you can be part of the story through your unique writing voice or notes to the reader. Authenticity. Although you employ literary devices used in fiction to craft a great piece of creative nonfiction, remember that it is nonfiction. You must tell the truth. Check your facts and never exaggerate to improve the story. Setting. Each story has a setting. The setting is the place where the story takes place. Usually an effective story establishes its setting early in the story. Otherwise, readers will have a difficult time visualizing the action of the story. Where does the story take place? What do we know about this location? How is it described and to what effect? Are the usual questions we have to resolve. Descriptive imagery. Basically, it's the way the writer paints the scene or image in the mind of the reader. It usually involves descriptions of one or more of the five senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, or taste. Plot. Plot is one of the basic elements of every story. Put simply, plot refers to the actual events that take place within the bounds of your narrative. Using our rhetorical situation vocabulary, we can identify plot as the primary subject of a descriptive personal narrative. Three related elements to consider are scope, sequence, and pacing. The plot of the story is kind of simple. It appears to be chronological. What happens in the story and in what order? How does the order of the events impact their meaning? We usually ask ourselves these kind of questions to have a better output. Scope. The term scope refers to the boundaries of plot. Where and when does the story begin and end? What is its focus? What background information and details does the story require? Characters. A major requirement of any story is the use of characters. Characters bring life to the story. Keep in mind that while human characters are most frequently featured in stories, sometimes there are non-human characters in the story such as animals or even the environment itself. Who are the people or sometimes animals or other entities in the story? What kinds of characters are they? How are they characterized? Figurative language. As a counterpart to descriptive imagery, figurative language is using language in a surpassing way to describe a literary moment. Figurative language can take the form of metaphor. It can also take the form of a simile that made it more interesting for the readers to connect with. How does the author effectively use language as an artistic tool to render the story? What metaphors, similes, or descriptive imagery does the author use to make the story immersive, and why? All these elements surely have a significant role in making our works more beautiful. It could also make us efficient writers or editors, and the learnings could also be used in many other forms. Knowing all this stuff could make us more aware of the stories we read and the stories we have read and made us observe the world where we lived in. That is the end of today's lesson, and other subgenres of creative nonfiction will be discussed in the next part of this course packet. Thank you and see you again at our next session. I am Jana Denise El Domingo, your discussant from English 3A.